Hola, bienvenido. Welcome to this special program in which we look back over a very historic visit of Pope Francis to Latin America. I'm Father Tom Rosica, CEO of Salt and Light Television, and over the next hour we will present to you a panoramic visit of a most historic moment in the papacy of Pope Francis. But I'm not going to tell you this alone. With me I have a team of experts, if you will, who covered this visit moment by moment and will share some of our reflections on what happened in Latin America, more precisely in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and in Paraguay, when the Bishop of Rome went on pilgrimage. With me is Alicia Ambrosio, one of our Vaticanista reporters who covered this visit, Argentine background, but of Canadian stock from our own country. We have Emily Callan from our French department, who today is going to be an Anglophone, Sebastian Gomes, one of our senior producers, and we have a very special guest imported from the United States, the Catholic guy, Lino Rulli. Lino, you're going to provide for us some of the more interesting moments of this visit, and of course your typical running commentary.
Right, I'll be more interesting than the rest. Thank you, Father Tom, for pointing that out.
That's
I appreciate
why you're here.
That. Thank you.
I want to start off with some images of a vicar of Christ, of a Bishop of Rome, spoken in our country in September 1984 in Edmonton. Yes, the South becoming always poor and the North becoming always richer. Nevertheless, in the light of Christ's words, this poor South will judge the rich North. And the poor people and poor nations, poor in different ways, not only lacking food, but also deprived of freedom and other human rights, will judge those people who take these goods away from them, amassing them to themselves, the imperialistic monopoly of economic and political supremacy at the expense of others. They're important words because last week in Latin America, we saw those words activated in an incredible way with an Argentine Pope bringing the gospel of joy to the people. A 13-hour flight took Pope Francis and his entourage from Rome to Ecuador. It all began there with a wonderful welcome at the airport. Let's look at that Ecuadorian visit and highlight some of the special moments. What do you remember from the Ecuador visit?
The thing that stood out for me really was the meeting with the men and women religious. It was not the first time, but it was where he got up and said, you know, I had this really lovely speech written, but you know what? I don't feel like reading here. And he just went on spontaneously and spoke about something directed at the religious but applicable to everyone. And he spoke about spiritual Alzheimer's. He called it spiritual Alzheimer's. But he went further into it and said it's when you forget, well, in English it was translated, it's when you forget where you come from. But what he was saying in Spanish, it has a little more nuance. It basically means when you forget where you were when God came and found you.
Spiritual Alzheimer's, Lino, it makes me think of you.
Thank you. I already forgot that I'm here, actually, Father Tom.
He's got this uncanny way, our dear Pope, of using these expressions. He's pulling them out of some kind of a hat. What do you make of some of his expressions that he's using?
I think the reason is so approachable is because he speaks not in a theological language that nobody can get, but in a way that no matter what educational background or lack thereof that you have, you get what he's saying, and it's a real easy takeaway. You know, I think all of his years in Buenos Aires, spending time in the slums, spending time not with the rich and the powerful of Argentina, but just with the average folk taught him a lot, like, oh, I should make sense and make this faith relatable to them, so that any one of my friends who's Catholic, not Catholic, goes, well, that's an interesting way of looking at life, of a spiritual Alzheimer's, or the stories that he tells, it just resonates so much because he's a regular person.
Now, Sebastian, you're the expert of the Francis Effect, that masterful film that you produced. What do you make of it? This is a pope, and he's using expressions like spiritual Alzheimer's. I don't recall that from the Code of Canon Law.
No, you won't find it there. It's an entirely kind of new magisterium, and it's a fascinating thing. And we touched on it in the film, this new way of communicating, and we can maybe talk about it, go in a little bit more detail later. But he has these amazing kind of one-liners and this way of connecting with people, and at the same time delivering a very, very powerful message. So, you know, just he had that meeting with the religious at that one event, but also in Ecuador, He was meeting with educators. He was meeting with civil authorities.
Tell me about that. The one with educators is very important because we'd like to think that Salt and Light is at the service of education in the church's mission of evangelization. Why was that talk so important in Ecuador to educators?
It was a unique talk on this apostolic journey, first and foremost. But secondly, he narrowed in on a very particular topic, namely ecology.
Right.
And he sort of went into Laudato Si, expounded it a little bit for people, and said this needs to be a primary focus for people who are involved in education and everybody in the global South. And this is also something else that we might be talking about a little bit more. He sees the people of the global South, as we kicked off the show, as John Paul II referred to, as the protagonists of this new world that we need to inaugurate here, one of justice, one of solidarity, one of dialogue, and one of inclusion, one that lifts people out of the difficult situations that they are. And he connects that with the environment. He sees the whole thing as a whole. It's integral. Everything is connected. It's an ecosystem of itself, our lives in the natural world. And he was just very direct and said, look, education needs to focus on the solutions to the ecological problems that we have around the world.
Emily, what do you remember from Ecuador? What really struck you from those first few days?
I think there was a richness to the culture that was brought out, and I think we need to remember too. Like this is the Pope Francis going back to his home territory in a way.
It's kind of like Bergoglio in situ, you know. It's vintage Bergoglio we saw those days.
I mean, we saw dancing, we saw lots of singing. It was very colorful, and I think it was very unique to these countries welcoming him. So you really did see the joy of welcoming the Holy Father, which was the theme of the trip. The joy of announcing the gospel.
In each of these countries that he carefully chose, there was a certain political message that was given as well. He went to proclaim the gospel, he went to share the Evangelii Gaudium, but there were also political issues that he addressed. What struck you from the visit in Ecuador? Was there anything political? Was there a strong message given to the nation?
Well, he's looking, I think, he's looking beyond just the particular interests of any country, and he's looking at Latin America as a whole, and he knows the power of mobilization in the global South, as I referred to before. And so I think he's trying to break down barriers that might exist between people who are, for example, like Ecuadorians and their neighbors, or Bolivians and their neighbors, or the people from Paraguay and their neighbors, and to say, look, we're all one family here, and we all share the same tradition and the same heritage. So let's look at the bridges we can build instead of the walls that divide us. Now, certainly some political questions came up, but he sort of just pierced right through those and wouldn't allow those to be the main topic of conversation. He wanted us to look at the whole picture instead.
Lino, what do you make of Pope Francis's liturgical style?
It's simple, and I'm a simple person, so I get it. I personally like his liturgical style. I'm a horrible singer. Nobody wants to hear me sing. I know
he doesn't sing either.
God bless him, exactly.
He listens to music.
Well, we all listen to music in some sense, but I love the fact that the Pope either can't sing or won't sing.
He recognizes that he's tone
I was
deaf.
pretending I'm deaf.
Yeah.
The point is, I love the fact that he's sort of his own man. He's almost too comfortable in his own skin, in the sense that he's like, yeah, I'm not going to sing that. A Holy Father, popes always sing. What are you going to do? And I love the liturgical style. First of all, I've never seen a pope look at his watch more. I mean, he's constantly. I don't have a watch, but he's constantly doing this.
It's a Swatch watch too. It's a black, simple watch.
Is it?
It is.
Is he promoting Swatch for some reason? Is he getting a little something?
We're not allowed to say. It's a black watch. It's a black plastic band watch.
I love the fact that he experiences Mass the way many of us do. He's looking at his watch. He's telling people, hey, let's move this thing along. Not so long with this song over here. I love it. I don't know. He says it's because maybe he has one lung. I got two lungs and I still can't sing. So I love his liturgical style. I know I sound a bit like a homer here. I just like everything about him because he's doing what he is most comfortable with. He dresses in a simple way. He talks in a simple way. I go back to the fact that I'm a simple person, and that's why I get him.
And this is the thing, going back to the issue of papal communication that I was referring to earlier. It's amazing. I remember I did an interview with Matt Malone of American Magazine, I don't know, maybe over a year ago, and we were talking about Francis. And he said, it's astounding how he has simultaneously both raised the level of papal communication and lowered it at the same time. Like, and he's managed to do this. It's just incredible because it's so kind of spontaneous and informal, and it's him, but it connects with so many people. So many more people are paying attention to what he's saying, and yet he's still himself and kind of like making it accessible to everyone. It's an extraordinary feat.
One of the really beautiful things is he didn't miss an opportunity to weave in these important messages. You know, if there was going to be a list of themes to be covered throughout the visit, the themes emerged, I think, from the Aparecida document. They found a special place in Evangelii Gaudium, and then they're being shared now. It's like the seed that's being scattered in different parts of the world. The themes of the family, the cultura del encuentro, this culture of encounter. A beautiful explanation of Mariology and Marian devotion and piety. The Pope believes very much in that, but not cheap Mariology or cheap piety, profound piety that's rooted in the scriptures. Laudato Si, I mean, this was the marketing venture for Laudato Si. Let's test out Laudato Si now in the very places that have often been the first victims of the lack of care of the planet. Who suffers the most? It's the poor. The people in the Amazon, the people where mining has pillaged the land, the people where pollution is suffocating and killing others. There was a political message. There was a great invitation to dialogue. There was the throwaway culture that was mentioned, the critique of the economy. We'll come back to that because I think he's kind of reflecting a bit after the journalist asked him certain questions on the plane. And then, Lino, as we pointed out, he has this uncanny ability of coining certain phrases. The drama of isolated consciousness. Compassion is not about zapping. I mean, that's going to be on t-shirts pretty soon, you know, with all those other expressions. And then beautiful references to Mary and the Holy Family and the association with the Holy Family. There's something happening here that is very unique. It's not that other popes didn't do this, but I think, you know, the ones who might be suffering the most may be some of the speechwriters and the Secretary of State or Father Lombardi and some of his staff probably making the sign of the cross when the Pope goes up to the podium and waiting for that. Here, President of the Episcopal Conference, put this on the website. I want to talk. I want to speak to the people. And it's that connection where it's not that those words didn't matter because they still are part of the official magisterium, but there's a connection that's being made here with simple vocabulary, and that will go in, and that comes to people's hearts.
Not only a message, but an example. You know, he talks all the time about the ability to be open to the Holy Spirit. And whenever you ask, you know, Christians about Pope Francis and what they see, what they like about him, very often they'll say, this is a man inspired by the Holy Spirit. And he goes where the Holy Spirit leads him. And his whole life and the way, all these things that you're talking about, the way he communicates with people is a lesson to all of us, never to shut the door. Like a couple occasions on this trip, he was speaking about children. I don't know, when he went to the Children's Hospital,
Yes,
I think,
yes.
And he was saying, you know, just be yourselves. There's something wonderful about being children, and Jesus was very attracted to children because they were so spontaneous and they were fun, and you know, they just were themselves. They were comfortable in their own skin. They were open to different things. They were inspired by new ideas, things like that. He said that's the attitude that we need to have as Christians today, and he just models that for us. So, and that's the powerful lesson that goes beyond just our own individual behavior too. I think it affects our whole outlook on the church, our whole outlook on the world. Can we be open to something new? Can we kind of get out of our comfort zone and say, yes, I will be flexible here, and I will look at a situation and try to make the best of it.
One thing that really struck me is the Pope's use of sacred scripture and the Pope's understanding of what a homily is. I teach scripture. I know all the insides and the mechanics and the exegesis and everything else, which will put people to sleep. But Pope Francis, in taking these gospel stories, what it's done for me is incredible. For example, at the first Mass in Ecuador on July the 7th, he's speaking about the gospel of the wedding feast at Cana. And he's got some great lines. Like, I would have never thought of these. How many elderly people feel left out of family celebrations? They long for a little love. This lack of wine can be due to unemployment, illness, and difficult situations within our families. And then he comes out with this line, Mary is not a demanding mother, nor a mother-in-law who reveals in our lack of experience our mistakes and the things we forget to do. Mary, quite simply, is mother. You know how much time I spent in studying that story and teaching John's story of the first miracle as this symbol and all of the exegesis. And then he comes out and says, Mary's not a mother nor a mother-in-law, she's just mother. She's there and she recognizes the joy was missing. And he did the same thing with the story of Bartimaeus, the blind man, with a beautiful teaching, a beautiful exegesis on this. The family has played very important to this visit. Not surprising, as we're in this synodal journey from synod to talk about the issues and crises of the family. How did you understand the Pope's use of family in this visit, his references to family?
Well, I think that first starting with the Mass, his first Mass at the Bicentennial Park, where he did mention the family for the first time and referred to the fact that, we would be discussing this issue again at the Ordinary Synod next October. And so for him, it's something that's very important, and that there are real issues that we need to talk about. He brought it up again even with the youth at the end of the trip. So at the his closing event, if you could say, where he heard testimonies, and one in particular of a young 25-year-old woman who was sharing that she was taking care of her mother who had Alzheimer's and her grandmother, and that she felt very alone at times. But he was saying, no, like our family is also the community that surrounds us. And so he saw in her testimony that the family is something that is not just reserved to blood relation, but that we find the support in the Christian family and in the friends that surround us and support us.
Alicia, what do you make of all this? You're from down there. You're into all this familia. You're into all this hugging and kissing and abrazos and everything.
But he shows that he's really tapped into the essence of his own culture, of the Latin American culture. You're talking about countries where there isn't necessarily a social safety net like there is in Canada. There aren't exactly the same resources that we have in North America, and your only support system is the family. So what happens when a family is touched by alcoholism? What happens when children have to move to another province or another country to find work? And that's a situation for many Bolivians and for many Paraguayans. When the children have to move to another country just to get work and leave parents behind, well, then those parents are left without that social safety net. And so what could be one small problem for us in the northern world with the family, in the context of Latin America, becomes devastating. Like Liz, the girl Liz, who gave witness about having to take care of not only her mother who has Alzheimer's, but also her grandmother with no family to speak of. Yeah. It just highlights how vital the family is. And if we let that go, if we lose sight of what families need in order to be supported, well, then you've got a whole continent that is headed towards disaster, basically. And I think that's what he was recognizing, and that's what he was trying to lift up and really put into focus. This is why we're focused on this. This is why I've called for 2 synods on the family, not because of different issues that are perceived as important in the northern world, but because of how vital the family is to people's existence in the south of the world.
By the way, what does he have against mother-in-laws? Does Pope Francis, he's always making good, for a celibate guy, he never had to deal with a mother-in-law. He's got a real axe.
He's heard some horrible stories.
He's got an axe to grind. He even says he's like the Virgin Mary. It's not like some annoying mother-in-law. You understand what I'm saying
I think he
here.
may have heard some stories.
He's heard a lot of stories in that confessional is what I think he's heard. He's like, oh, it's enough of these mother-in-laws.
I love to go to visit Capernaum, the village on the Sea of Galilee. And there's a huge statue of St. Peter there, and they take you and show you the Church of the Panis Vitae and a big statue of Jesus and the bread of life. But I think they made a mistake in Capernaum. There should be a huge statue to a mother-in-law, to Peter's mother-in-law.
That's right. Because
she was healed there. Jesus went in and raised her up, and then she got up and served them at the table.
Right. Do you think he did that to annoy Peter, by the way? Is there any chance, Father Tom, that Peter was like, finally, I got a night free at mother-in-law of mine's sick bed? And Jesus is like, you know what? I'm going to heal her now. She'll serve us, but then you'll have to stay up and talk to her all night.
Some people have been nasty enough to say this is why Peter denied Jesus at the end.
See?
But that's not in the Bible, though. Now, we speak a lot about climate change these days, and certainly from Laudato Si, there was an awful lot of noise and senseless noise made about climate change. But we saw Pope Francis experience rapid climate change when he left Ecuador and went up to Bolivia in La Paz and only stayed for a few hours. I mean, after all, he's got 1 3/4 lungs, and there's some altitude problems there. Sebastian, what struck you about Bolivia?
Well, in Bolivia, the Pope gave, in my opinion, the most powerful address of the entire trip. It was a lengthy address that he gave at the Expo to the second world meeting of the popular movements. He had met with this same group in October, I think, of last year, of 2014.
Twice in a year.
Twice in a year. And he was really moved by what they represented and what they were talking about at the Vatican. That meeting took place at the Vatican last October. And I would encourage people to go back and read what he said at that first meeting too, because
Thanks for mentioning that. Go to our website. All the things we're talking about and the most up-to-date versions of them are found at the Salt and Light website. Go to that website to get the full sense of these talks.
And he picked up on what he said last October, and he said, look, there's certain things that are just inalienable rights for human beings. And he touched on labor. He touched on, what were the other two? Labor?
Well, it's a job, housing,
and land. Land, labor, and lodging. That's right, the three L's.
Aren't these socialist or kind of communist ideas? Now, what's he doing here?
Well, some people interpret it that way, but Pope Francis is so clear that he's not making any of this stuff up. When he talks about the economy, when he critiques, a capitalist system that leaves many people or most people excluded from participating in that economy, he said that's not right. It's very complex. We can talk about it more, obviously, but at that particular the Expo in Bolivia, when he was giving that address, it was this amazing discourse about inclusion, the importance of inclusion, the importance of the environment, like you mentioned. He brought all these different things together, and then, to my surprise a little bit, but I thought it was really quite amazing, he said, look, and all of this new world that we want, this change that we all want,
we need change.
We need it, we want it, and then he said, it's possible. Like, we have everything that we need. We don't need more stuff. We don't need more money. We don't need more food and natural resources. We have them.
Look at this. Look at the passion as he's expressing these words, and look at some of the images of the crowd.
Les digo con pesar, se han cometido muchos y graves pecados contra los pueblos originarios de América en nombre de Dios. Lo han reconocido mis antecesores. Lo ha dicho el SELAM, el Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano. Y también yo quiero decirlo. Al igual que mi predecesor, San Juan Pablo II, pido que la Iglesia, y cito lo que dijo él, se postre ante Dios e implore perdón por los pecados pasados y presentes de sus hijos. Y quiero ser muy claro, como lo fue San Juan Pablo II, pido humildemente perdón, no solo por las ofensas de la propia Iglesia, sino por los crímenes contra los pueblos originarios durante la llamada conquista de América.
The apologies. There were a number of apologies made in this talk. I mean, if my notes are correct, there were 7 apologies. There were 7 statements. The system is now intolerable. Farm workers, they find it intolerable. Behind all the pain and death, there's the stench of what Basil of Caesarea, I smiled at this, one of the church's first theologians called the dung of the devil. It's another expression, Lino, for a t-shirt.
I love that as a t-shirt. Get a hat.
Working for a just distribution of the fruits of the earth and human labor is not mere philanthropy. It's not enough to let a few drops fall wherever the poor shake a cup, which never runs over by itself. I mean, these are incredible expressions. I humbly ask forgiveness, not only for the offenses of the church, but also for the crimes committed against the native peoples. This new colonialism, imagine, new colonialism in this day and age, in our common home, our common home. Laudato Si. Our common home is being pillaged, laid waste, and harmed with impunity. Cowardice in defending it is a grave sin. Lino, I think you should invite this guy to be on the Catholic Guy show.
You know, we've thought about inviting him on, but we're not so sure as he doesn't say enough. He doesn't have enough personality. I'm afraid he doesn't do it in sound bites, you know. So we've decided not to invite Pope Francis on my radio show. But if you think we should, I guess I can take another look at it. He's been calling almost every week.
He calls in, huh?
It's incessant. He always does different voices though, and so it's kind of a problem. We've actually been blocking his calls. You know what I wanted him to do in Bolivia? I wanted him to eat the cocoa leaves. I thought this would have been something, because I didn't. Well, when I've been in those parts of the world, I've never eaten those sort of things, and I think it's a weird high. But if the Pope would have done it, I mean, it would legalize pot
Now,
next.
for the sake of our viewers, just to rest your minds, to be at peace, he spoke on the plane on the way home on those famous in-flight entertainment plane rides, and he told them that he did not, contrary to public opinion, he did not relish the cocoa leaves. He did not try the cocoa leaves.
I'm glad he didn't.
So
And
put your minds at rest.
would have put a lot of pressure on the rest of us to do the Coke next time we go there.
I have to say, though, the journalists on the flight were actually tweeting photos of the Coke leaf tea that they were drinking on board the plane themselves. So we don't know. He didn't chew them. Maybe he had the tea.
The talk that was given in Bolivia to that large assembly was for an assembly gathered in a historical place in time. But as with each of these talks, this is the Vicar of Christ, this is the Bishop of Rome, this is the Pope who's speaking to the world church. What did that talk mean, or what would that talk mean to people in the United States or Canada?
Yeah, well, he said explicitly, he said, look, I'm here with you, but I'm not just speaking to you. I am speaking to everyone.
Well,
because
you
the things that
and he's aware of that,
And
too.
he's aware of that, and he says it explicitly. And he has very powerful, concrete messages. He says that an economy cannot exclude people. An economy must serve people. It can't sacrifice people. It can't leave people on the outside. And interestingly, he also said, now, as far as a practical sort of recipe for success here, if you want to like put together an effective economic model, don't look to me. I'm not the person to come up with this. I'm not the economist necessarily. But this is the reality. These are the problems that we face. And that's really interesting, because a lot of people who criticize the Pope for his economic theory, if you will, say, well, he's not an economist, and what is he doing commenting on the economy? The Pope is concerned about human beings. And human beings participate in an economy in order for the world to function. So of course, anything connected to a human being, the Pope has a right to speak on. He sees that these problems, the problems of the economy, are the result of a fallen human nature and our inability to be the best we can be. And he's trying to encourage us to be the best that we can be to each other. Solidarity, reaching out, community, all those things, inclusion, encounter, tenderness, all those things that we associate with Pope Francis. And that's the way he wants us to look at the economy, for example.
Another moment in Bolivia which really struck me was his meeting with the clergy of Bolivia. And he gave a marvelous reflection, a homily on the story of Bartimaeus, the blind beggar on the road. And a couple expressions I just want to highlight there, because they continue to speak to me. He spoke about, this is the drama of isolated consciousness, of those disciples who think that the life of Jesus is only for those who deserve it. At its basis, there's a profound disdain for the holy, faithful people of God. They seem to believe there's only room for the worthy, for the better people, and little by little they separate and differentiate themselves from the others. They've made their identity a badge of superiority. They are not pastors, but they're foremen. I'm here now, get into your place. I mean, it's an incredible thing. As a priest, those words are directed to me, not just in Bolivia, but they're directed to me. How many times do I act as a foreman? And to put people in their place, and you're not worthy because you're a layperson, because you're a woman, because you're divorced, because you're gay, because you're this. You're not worthy. And this is a stern warning. And then, the pièce de résistance, there can be no compassion without stopping, hearing, and showing solidarity with the other. Compassion is not about zapping. I mean, zap people away, just dismiss them. It's not about silencing pain, it's about the logic of love. It was incredible. You had a special moment in Bolivia too, you told me. One of the very special moments which also spoke to the world. Tell me about it.
When he visits prisons. I love when he visits prisons. You know, the fact of the matter is, it's very difficult to meet the Pope nowadays. When he comes to America, it's so difficult. I'm not encouraging crime to be committed.
Who's in the
but
best position to meet the Pope?
prisoners. I mean, let's
Okay,
face
do
it.
something.
I'm not encouraging to commit a crime, but if you want to meet the Pope on his trip to the U.S., I'm telling you, think about it.
Just don't get sent to Guantanamo. Actually, maybe you could go there too.
Yeah, he's going to be there too. If you go to Guantanamo, you'll see him in Cuba. He's spending more nights there than he is in New York, where I live. The fact is, I love his insistence, and I know that sort of sounds strange, his insistence on visiting prisoners, his insistence on going out to the people who aren't the presidents of countries and who aren't the administrators of anything. But really, the two best things to be right now, if you want to be around the Vicar of Christ, are homeless or a prisoner. It's your best chance.
Or a kid.
And what's that?
Or a kid.
Or a kid. A screaming kid who doesn't want anything to do with you. Those are the three best options. But what I loved is he didn't go into the prison and say, you know, God forgives you, God loves you, you know,
Yeah, what did
I'm
he
sorry,
say,
the soup
what did he
isn't
say in
good.
Bolivia, and, which I believe is the largest prison in South America? They talk about that horrendous prison where there's all kinds of crime and bribing and things going on. How did he start off?
By the way, Father Tom, I think bribing's the best thing that's going on in the of everything going on in the prison system, and I'd be like, bribing's the least of my
probably
concerns.
the least of concerns.
Yeah, I'll be like, fine, go bribe them. I'm okay with that. When he talks about the fact that the man that's standing in front of them is himself a sinner, that's what you need to hear when you're in jail. That's what you need to hear, in my case, when you're a real sinner. Is you don't need the prodigal story regurgitated you in some other way of, oh, that's right, somebody once screwed up and came back. But the fact that there's the Pope, there's the Bishop of Rome, the Vicar of Christ, who's not saying, I too am a sinner, but is really, you get a sense, you're like,
The one before you. Hey guys, open up your eyes.
I'm a sinner. The fact that he's saying it and you know he means it, he is so conscious of his own sins. He's so aware that every one of us has done stupid things that could put us in jail or has been saved from doing the stupid things that put us in jail, that there's no difference between the Pope and somebody in jail. I love his trips there. To me, they're the most authentic and in some ways the most sincere.
Another moment in Bolivia, which became a big photo opportunity, of course, was a certain gift that was presented by the president, President Morales in this case, to the Pope. You commented on that to me before. I remember when it was happening, you sent me some messages. What's going on here? Tell me about that gift.
So the president, Evo Morales, gave the Pope a cross that was actually designed by a Jesuit father.
The Jesuit father being Father Luis Espinal, a Spaniard who was
Yes.
martyred
In
the same
1980.
year as Oscar Romero. Take a
Yeah.
look at the Pope's face here as Morales is presenting the cross to him. Now, there are those who would like to say that the Pope said, what the heck is this? It's the wrong thing. And what do you think the Pope said?
Well, the reports were that he actually said, I didn't know about this. He didn't know that Father Espinal was actually an artist and a poet.
Right.
And he didn't know that Father Espinal had designed this
And on the
crucifix.
plane ride on the way home, he was asked point blank about this. I'm surprised that somebody had the guts to ask him. And he gave a wonderful answer. He referred it back to Father Espinal being an artist, and it was a form of protest art
Yes.
that's got to be taken in context. And he referred back on the plane ride, he talked about a letter that Father Arrupe wrote at the time when all of this was fomenting in the 1980s, and the Marxist ideology that was later corrected by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith with the teaching on liberation theology. I mean, it's a complex story.
By the way, is there a worse actor than Pope Francis? When this guy doesn't understand, when he doesn't put on the face of a politician like, oh, lovely, he's like, when he's bored, he's bored. When he doesn't want to meet you, he's like, good to see you. You give him a gift he doesn't like, he goes, I don't know what this is.
I was thinking that when you were talking about how happy he is when he goes to a prison or he's with homeless people. Like if you see him with all the official politicians and like the formal meetings that he has to be at, he's like, snooze fest, like get me out of here and get
Now,
me
there's
with like
a
the
couple other
poorest
things
people.
he did too on this trip. As people are giving testimonies, the pocket, he gets the pen and he's writing in the pages there. And then he goes up and there's this priceless moment. He'll go to the podium and he's got the text. Let's talk. Come on, let's get real. I mean, and people are listening. There's something amazing happening.
You know, the other thing about his reactions, though, wouldn't you hate to be the one who's talking and he's not making any notes? He's going, this isn't really doing much for me, buddy. Move it along. It's a sign of affirmation when the Pope's like, oh, give me that pen. I got something to write down here. Otherwise, he goes, yeah, it's all right. You can speed up the process here.
I want to come back to the cross because there is actually a very profound story here. When the Pope stopped to pray at the site of Father Luis Espinal's death, a tragic death in 1980. He was a Spanish Jesuit, a poet, a journalist, and a filmmaker. And he was assassinated in the same year as Oscar Romero. He lived alongside the families of miners during their struggle under the dictatorship of Luis Garcia Meza, one of the bloodiest periods in Bolivian history. His body was discovered the following day. His murder caused profound shock throughout the country. And on March 24th in La Paz, the funeral was attended by millions. In 2007, Morales declared March 21st Bolivian Cinema Day. Incredible, Bolivian cinema, because this priest, I mean, if he were alive today, he'd be with us at Salt and Light. To commemorate his assassination and to pay homage to him in Bolivian cinematography. It's a remarkable story. So, and the Pope said, the Pope, by the way, assured us that he didn't leave the cross in Bolivia. The cross has gone back to Santa Marta. It'll probably be in the dining room or someplace at Santa Marta. From Bolivia, the conclusion took place. The Pope flew up to Paraguay. Paraguay, another Latin American country that provided a wonderful, colorful, folkloric welcome. And there was a wonderful mass at the shrine of Caucupé. Beautiful scenes from that liturgy. And the homily at Caucupé, once again about Mary, the birth of Jesus, the flight to Egypt, Jesus' death on the cross, and Mary was there. What about this Marian piety and devotion that's emerging in this pontificate?
Well, the Marian devotion that he's talking about it so often for a reason. This is central to the Latin American spirituality. Every neighborhood in the cities has a Marian shrine of some sort. Every village has its own Marian shrine. Every village has its own Marian feast day, and pretty much every day is a Marian feast across Latin America. It's the most natural thing. For some reason, it's very easy to connect, for Latin Americans to connect with Mary as mother. And so in those moments of desperation where the country is falling apart, the economy is crashing, there's no food to be had, there's no money to be had, they turn to Mary. That's all they have. It's very natural. And in Pope Francis's case, he's getting it from two sides. He's getting it from the Latin American context he lives in, and he was getting that devotion passed on to him from the Italian family. So he had a double dose of it. And it's not for nothing that everywhere he goes, there's a different, like every country has their Marian patroness, and he's honoring every one of them. And I love Our Lady of Caucupé. She's got these beautiful flowing curls. She doesn't look austere.
He said some rather interesting things about the women of Paraguay. Do you have Paraguayan blood by chance?
Because of the crown. No, yes, he did. He has, some people say he would have a love affair with the Paraguayan women.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Scandalous.
Lino.
I'm leaving. I'm getting up. This is the kind of talk you have at Salt and Light.
Lino,
I can't have this.
This is for your story. This is for your radio show. No, this is not our stuff.
Very
okay?
scandalous.
But it's all, he was in one of his speeches, he honors the women because they were left, basically there were only very few women left for the men because they had all gone to war. And so they basically brought the country back on its feet after that, raising the children, educating them. And yeah.
Sebastian, if you remember during the World Youth Day in Rio, I sent you and Joshua to the slum, one of the worst barrios, one of the worst hard-hit violent areas with Pope Francis. And we saw a similar thing. I'm not sure about the level of violence at Bañado Norte de Asunción, but it was a very powerful visit. Just before the Mass, imagine beginning your day, getting up early, leaving the nunciature, and going to this slum.
Actually that visit, it was very powerful, and exactly for the reason that you said, that because I had the chance to be in the favela in Rio with the Pope.
What was it like in that favela? Tell me again. I mean, you shared it with the staff and we were all moved. What was it like that morning?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, first of all, the level of security was sort of jarring. But once you got past that, like the fact that the streets were lined with soldiers and there were snipers in the roofs and helicopters flying over and everything, when you looked past all that, you saw the people that live there. And we had a chance to do some interviews
in his
with
face?
them. Well, he's just, I mean, it's like we were talking about before. He's totally at home. I mean, he feels comfortable with those people, with ordinary people. That's when he's his most comfortable, when he's most at peace. And when he looks at someone, especially in a situation like that, they are literally the most important person to him in the world at that moment. He's able to just connect with them in a one-on-one situation, despite the cameras and the crowds and the security and whatever, in a way that's just very, very profound. But so that's vintage him. But it comes into his entire outlook on things, which is that the poor people are at the heart of the gospel. That's like one of his main messages of his entire pontificate. It's an extraordinary thing. You know, and he gave a very powerful message about solidarity, about how, you know, a faith that is not coupled with solidarity, real solidarity. In other words, like having a relationship with people who you know, are poor, less fortunate than you, the people who are on the margins, is not a real faith. He said, you know, if you go to Mass on Sunday but you don't know what's happening in this favela, it's not a faith based on Jesus. That's not a faith based on the gospel. I mean, that's enormously challenging to all of us. Especially all of us, you know, who are up here in the global north, so to speak, and have a much more comfortable life than many people down there. So it was jarring, it was challenging, but he is speaking, he's a voice for them, you know, and with them, and they feel that. And, you know, I think if he was going to move to somewhere in Paraguay, it would be like somewhere there, and he would just move in with one of these families.
Is he planning to move to Paraguay? Did something happen for
Well, you know,
Sebastian?
I had a dream last night, and I dreamt that you were a special assistant to the Speaker of the House of the United States Congress.
We're both very tan, so it's not that far off.
That's what that struck me, the similarities. And let's say that you, as the special assistant and advisor to the Speaker of the House, who is overseeing the visit of Pope Francis to this special session of the United States Congress in September, what was going through your mind as you were watching Pope Francis on the loose in his home territory?
The first thing I would do, I'd get all the members of Congress, I'd say, we all got to pray super hard that he stays to the texts. The texts are going to be
Our
a little
friends.
bit more, yeah, the texts are our friends in this particular case. They've been approved, it's not off the cuff, so let's get everybody together and let's, liberal, conservative, independent, whatever, let's all pray super hard he sticks to the text.
And then what happens if he pulls a Bergoglio?
When he is himself.
Yeah.
Well, now, as a media person, what I'd say is, just take the stuff you like and ignore the stuff you don't. And because that's what every politician is going to do anyway, they will fire me for being so obvious with my job. And then the next thing in reality is when the Pope is himself, when he does go off the cuff and when he does speak really from the heart, what I would like to say is take a real listen. And take a listen not just to what you like, but take a listen to that which you don't like. And see if maybe he might be able to speak to you in a particular way that makes you uncomfortable, because the gospel should make everybody uncomfortable.
I want to share with you what was maybe my favorite moment of the whole time. And it came on Sunday night in the final moments before he went to the airport in Paraguay. He stopped along the river, Costanera, and he had a youth rally with 600,000 young people. Just take a look at some of those scenes. I had the privilege of leading or guiding the World Youth Day in Canada, and I've been present at many World Youth Days and even worked at several of them. But for me, the Sunday evening rally was the quintessential World Youth Day. It was the crowning of World Youth Days for several reasons. First of all, he let go of the text. Second of all, he listened to those people who give those testimonies. And I must say that for the papal visits to date under Pope Francis, the people giving the testimonies have been so wisely and carefully and prudently chosen that they're not speaking piety and things that will turn people off. But the young woman who spoke about her mother having Alzheimer's and her grandmother suffering from dementia really hit home, because my own mother is suffering that same thing right now. How the girl said as a baby she was cared for, and now she's changing her mother's diapers. And how the young man was forced to leave home and go to the streets, and he encountered Christ, and now he realizes the importance of the church. And the young man Orlando, who proclaimed the gospel of the Beatitudes. The stars of that evening visit were the Vicar of Christ, the Bishop of Rome, Orlando, Manuel, and Liz, the three of them, because they connected with their audience. Let's just take a few glances at that special meeting.
So he says, while we are striving to live our prophetic, our celebratory, our missionary faith, we need, he says, more solid itineraries. that are gradual, meaning step by step, that are comprehensive and ongoing training in Christian faith. We live with an uncertain future, he said. Many of us are out of work and unable to study. What can we do, he asked, and to whom can we turn? After a short time, his mother died and he was left virtually all alone. It was then, he said, that he met young people who did service in youth ministry. They organized spiritual retreats, and that's where he had the experience that there is a God who can do anything. This is what I can say as a young agricultural worker who now, concluding his remarks to the Holy Father, goes and embraces the Holy Father.
What are we to make of this, and what are we to make of Papa Francisco? Is he a communist? Is he a socialist? We have to put this all in context. One of the most significant constants in our tradition is the suspicion of socialism, understood as an economic system that denies legitimacy of private property, underlies the free market, and fosters a class of struggle between the rich and the poor. The modern popes, the popes of our lifetimes, Leo XIII all the way to Benedict XVI, have all spoken clearly against such systems. And it's hard to deny that experience has confirmed this. John Paul II appreciated the role of a free market. Pope Leo XIII and his successors have deeply felt the suffering of those who have been exploited by the market, who have not been given adequate access to its benefits. What good is private property if people don't see that stealing is wicked? Won't wealthy destroy the rich man who doesn't appreciate the value of generosity? Won't the drive for profit lead to the destruction of nature unless people realize that the earth is a gift of a gracious God? These are the questions that were underlying this incredible visit. But as I said at the beginning, the visit was ultimately about joy. The one who gave us Evangelii Gaudium decided to bring the Gaudium of the Evangelii to Latin America, and we're all the better for it. God bless South America, and God help North America as they prepare for the visit of the bringer of joy. I'm Father Tom Rosica. Muchas gracias.